Hey, everybody. I appreciate everybody for coming. I feel bad for Tony getting sick. I was actually just going to talk on Sunday. Tony Turner was going to be here and talk about OT. I think he was doing network segmentation and using it to protect OT or ICS environments and got sick. So I was filling in. So I appreciate everybody for coming. This is actually a talk that I did at B-Sides ICS this year. So most of you are probably familiar with B-Sides ICS, right? Show of hands, right? And so we actually started this year the ICS or OT specific version of B-Sides and had a great turnout. And then we're actually going to see a couple of other spin-ups across the world next year, which is really exciting, like in Singapore and Belgium. We'll be back in Miami next year with B-Sides ICS. So just real quick, everything we're going to talk about here is educational purposes only. So this is just me, myself, and I. It's not associated with my day job or any of the other organizations that I'm affiliated with for my day job. I actually work with Fluor. If you're not familiar with Fluor, I had no idea what Fluor did when I went to work there 14 years ago, but we're actually one of the world's largest engineering and construction companies. So I had actually already started to get into OT in 2010 when Stuxnet occurred. Anybody hear of Stuxnet? Probably a few folks, right? And so when Stuxnet happened, I just was, this is an amazing piece of malware. It wasn't that it used 0 days for Windows, like it's not necessarily a big deal. And it's like, okay, you took control over these nuclear centrifuges that spun gas, right? Uranium gas to enrich it to make nuclear weapons. And it would physically break down those machines. That was fascinating. But really where I thought it was extremely fascinating was the fact that the operators that sat in the control room, right, they sat there and all the lights made it look like everything was perfectly fine, where behind the scenes, all those centrifuges were spinning up and spinning down and spinning up and spinning down, and they were physically breaking down over time, even though they thought everything was okay. And that was the beauty, I thought, of Stuxnet, and that kind of gets into the conversation around OT and ICS. So I do a lot in you see OT ICS. Some of you might know me from LinkedIn. So I do post on LinkedIn on OT ICS cybersecurity. So if we're not connected, feel free to reach out. You can always ping me there and ask questions. I also have, we'll skip over that. I also have a full 25-hour intro to OT ICS cybersecurity course on YouTube. So just look for Mike Holcomb. So this presentation I actually had put together because I was actually having a conversation one day with the gentleman that runs one of the world's largest OT ICS programs, literally for one of the world's largest oil and gas companies. And I hadn't been in OT very long, about 2 years. And he was talking about a PLC. So if you're not familiar with a PLC, it's the most common type of control system we use. It's essentially a little computer, and it's physically wired into different parts and components and systems out in the real world. And he was mentioned as like, oh, it's PLC. And I was like, kind of talking this conversation, like, if I was an attacker, this is what I would do. And we're going to get into some of that today. And he's like, yeah, but it's a PLC. It's not vulnerable. I'm like, what do you mean? And I started to doubt myself, right? Because this is the guy, right? He runs one of the world's largest OT cybersecurity programs. I'm like, I'm still pretty new at this. So I'm like, wow, I must be completely wrong. And then I'm like, I went and found like a CV in like 30 seconds for that one particular PLC. And it was like, okay, no, I know what I'm talking about sometimes at least. And so it really showed like the lack of awareness and knowledge in OT, right? And OT and ICS. And that was about 10 years ago, 10, 11, 12 years ago. And so when I went to do my master's, I did my master's through SANS, and I was going to write for OT ICS cybersecurity. And so we went through this conversation, and I wanted to make it realistic. I wanted to do something. I had one pitch about PLC insecurities, and some of you probably know Dr. Johannes Ulrich. He was the advisor. He's like, that's a great idea. That's a 500-page book. And it's like, okay. And so I came back. One area in OT and ICS environments, just like in IT, right? People struggle with inventory, right? And so no one has a complete inventory. If they do, like they might think they do, or they're just outright lying, right? And so OT, it's even a million times worse. In OT, we build what we call asset registers. And so you might have an asset register that looks like this. And so my goal of the project for my master's thesis was I was going to create a website, and that website, I'm going to have a couple scripts on the back end that would go out to those different types of PLCs from different vendors to determine if it's in run mode or not. And the idea with run mode is you kind of think of it as read-only mode, which means an attacker can't manipulate it remotely. Like, that sounds like super secure, right? I'm like, yeah, that's what we want. So if I'm running a plant and I see a PLC come out of run mode, I think of it as, well, now it's in a vulnerable state. I want to go fix that. Right? Now, even if it's in run mode, it's not as secure as you think. It is more secure than not, right? So we do definitely want them to be in run mode, right? You can still make changes to the programming in the PLC though. So again, it's not as secure, but you normally can't do things like upload firmware. So if an attacker was trying to upload malicious firmware, they wouldn't be able to do that if the PLC was in run mode, right? So we want to see, okay, I have all of these PLCs in the factory or in the plant. I want to make sure they're always in run mode. And if one of them comes out of run mode, I get a little flag, I investigate and see what was going on, right? And then we investigate, we find, oh, maybe a technician was making changes that they weren't supposed to, or it was outside of a scheduled window. No harm, no foul, we hope, and then we can get back to business, right? And so Johannes Ulrich says, that's an awesome idea, go for it. Got off the Zoom call, and I was like, oh crap, like I have to write a web interface to pull data. I have to figure out how I'm actually going to determine if these PLCs are actually in run mode remotely. I guess I was like, oh crap. And I am not a developer. I tried to be a developer, right? Any developers in the room? I'm very jealous. My mind does not think that way. And I don't have the patience either. It took me 50 years to admit that. I do not have the patience to be a developer. So I remember just reading an article though about how basically ransomware groups were using ChatGPT to create fully functional phishing platforms. And it was like, okay, well, if they're using it to write fully functioning phishing platforms, I could probably use it to do this. And so it went down this path. And so this is where if you've never played with ChatGPT or any other Gen AI products or platforms, right, you can sit there and you can just tell it what you want, right? You can sit there and tell it exactly what you want a tool to do. There's even a name for that now, which is what? Vibe coding, right? Yeah, that's come up over the last year or so, right? So it's like, oh yeah, like that's what we were doing. And in this case, right, I just wanted to start and say, hey, create a Python script to say, of course, we don't want to do hello world, right? Because that's like every class in development you take. But we did hello friend, which is from what? The pilot episode of our favorite TV hacker show, Mr. Robot, right? Yeah, it's the first thing he says, right? Hello friend, and you don't know it's talking to you, the voices in his head, right, himself. And then, right, ChatGPT, and look at all the other ones, you can, kind of work the same. Says, hey, here's your script. It even explains to you what to do. And it even explains to you how to run it if you don't know how to run it. I'm like, wow, right? That's pretty awesome. And so it's like, I can just copy that, right, code, throw it in a little script, run it, and hello, friend. Like, okay, awesome. So then we can go from there and then, okay, we'll step up our game, kind of like a normal development course. And this is where I always get lost. I'm like, well, you went from 0 to 100 super fast. But here in this case, just as a test, it was kind of like, okay, like I'm a big Nmat fan, right? I remember seeing Theodore at DEF CON like 20 years ago, writing his book on a little notebook, which was really cool. So it's like, let's just create a basic port scanner, a mini Nmat. right? And we're just say, create a port scanner. I'm just going to check for 5 different ports. So port 80, 443 we use for what? Yeah, web traffic, right? So for websites. And then, as we have a lot of websites in OT too, and then 102, 502, 44818, those are OT protocols, right? And so we wanted just to test a couple of those ports. And so, yeah, 30 seconds or less, like here's your little port scanner. And this is where I run it against my little Wi-Fi access point at home. And it says, oh yeah, you got probably an admin page running on 443, right? And then if I run it on my OT network, like here's against a PLC, so port 502 is open. 502 is used for anybody? Info? Modbus, yeah. So Modbus is the most commonly used protocol in OT, partly because it's open source. There's a lot of proprietary protocols in OT. Modbus is open source, so that's where we see it in a lot of places. So then we start thinking, well, Python is great, right? But what if I'm an attacker? Or what if I'm in an environment as a defender or an operator where I can't install Python on a machine? Now, one thing you might not realize in OT is that we have machines everywhere running Windows. Everywhere. There's as many Windows machines in OT as you have in IT. I think people don't realize. And so we have all those, common advantages and vulnerabilities and disadvantages, right? So when we talk about, well, living off the land, I don't want to install Python, right? Because that violates the whole credo of living off the land and using what you find. So what scripting language do we have in Windows, though, that allows us to do anything and everything with Windows? PowerShell, yeah. So it's like, I just go back to ChatGPT and say, hey, take that script and convert it to PowerShell. And 30 seconds or less, boom, I have a script, but when I run it, and for me, right, this is where I lose my patience. Like, I'm done, I'm out. Like, I'm done with the project. Except, and I literally closed the screen. I remember walking away, and then I was in the kitchen, and I was like, I wonder if I actually feed the error message back to ChatGPT, if it'll actually fix it or not. And 30 seconds or less, it's like, oh, you know what? I made a mistake. I found the problem. I fixed it. Here's the fixed script. Like, how cool is that? And I use, if you get anything from this talk, use ChatGPT, your favorite Gen AI platform, for error messages. Especially, like, I hate Linux error messages, right? and it's like, put it in ChatGPT, here's your problem. And it explains it. So you actually also learn. So I don't want you just to fix it, but it's nice to fix it. And so in this case, here's the PowerScript version, or the PowerShell version of that little scanner. So the format looks a little different, right? But it does the job. And so there we're living off the land, right? And so this is where, like, I'm sure there's a lot of people out here like myself that I don't know. I always get that idea where it's like, I wish I had this little tool to do like this one thing to make my life easier or make my life better, right? And it's like, yeah, you can do that now with ChatGPT. And you don't have to be a developer. Again, I'm very jealous of all of you that have that development mindset. It's just not in me. So in the OT world, I just have some examples of some projects that you can do. And I have the walkthroughs on GitHub, on my GitHub page, and I have some links at the end that you can check out. But we mentioned asset registers, right? That's a big miss in OT. They're not aware of what they actually have in the environment. They're actually worse than in IT. If you walk into a power plant, you would think they would realize the equipment that they have and how it's connected and IP addresses, and no, they don't. Even in nuclear facilities, it's really crazy. So we don't like to do active scanning, right? We don't want to see Nmap in an OT environment. Why? Yeah, if we hit a control system and it's sensitive for multiple reasons, that it could emotionally and physically, that it could actually crash or reboot, right? Or it could brick. You literally would have to replace it. And then it gets in that they don't even know where a replacement is. They didn't even know where that one was to begin with, right? So We usually look at passive means to find out what's in the environment, watching network traffic. A lot of OT environment, you find peak apps that they're just everywhere that somebody created once upon a time. And so in this case, I just used ChatGPT, right? Create a script, strip out all the IP addresses and the MAC addresses, because what can we use the first half of the MAC address to do? We can look up the manufacturer, right? So they're registered. So you can run this script. It says, hey, you have to install a couple Python modules, right? It gives you the instructions on how to do that through pip. We run the little tool, and then I get this, and it says, enter the path to your PCAP file. And I was like, that's not happening, because I'm going to be like C:\\, where the hell did I put the file? Like, no. So I was like, I'll go back to ChatGPT just to see what happens, and says, hey, give me a GUI to be able to specify the location of the file. And then when you run it again, boom, there you go. Like you can, double click, find the file and load it. And then it goes through the process where it strips out all the IP addresses, the MAC addresses, does the reverse lookup on the MAC address for the vendor, and then saves it in an Excel spreadsheet, which is where everybody stores their IT asset registers. Really cool, right? And there's some companies, right, that they charge a lot of money for something as simple as that. So I've also had a lot of fun finding things on the internet. So most of you probably, how many are familiar with Shodan? Probably most, right, at DEF CON, right? Shodan actually started as a tool to find control systems that were exposed to the internet. That was the whole thing. Like, here's a power plant that you can control. Here's a traffic light, right? Here's a water treatment facility. So the NSA actually released Elite Wolf. Now, I remember when the NSA released the Geiger project at DEF CON, like 10 years ago, right? That was really awesome. Software package, reverse engineer, right? Be able to create buffer overflows. Awesome. So when they're like, hey, we're releasing this project, it's like really cool. I'm like, I was so excited. And then you jump into the GitHub repository, and there were just 3 text files. And I'm like, what is this? And then you open them up, and then you start looking at them, and it's like, these are snort signatures. I was like, okay, like I get it if you're trying to help me find an attacker in the environment, but it's kind of like, I don't know, is this really a big deal? And it's another one of those, like I closed the screen, and then I realized after I stepped away, it's like, oh shoot, like the file for Allen Bradley Rockwell, which major OT, control system vendor, those are URLs. And so it's like, well, I can't put a URL in Shodan, but I can put a URL in what search engine? I can put it in Google. So I was like, oh, just take that URL, put it in Google, and 2 seconds, here's a bunch of those PLCs that are actually exposed on the internet. So you actually can't find these actually easily, believe it or not, in Shodan that way, but you can just actually go to Google. And there's like 50, I think the actual number is increasing, which is not a good sign, but there's about 60 of these active, just this one particular model online. So, right, here's a PLC, here's a PLC, here's a PLC that are all connected. I mean, these are controllers, right? These are just little computers. Some engineers hate it when I say that. They're physically wired into physical systems. Like if I had a power plant, there's a turbine in that power plant, right, turning that turns a generator to create electricity. That turbine is connected essentially to one of those control systems that does things like monitor, right, how fast the turbine is spinning. Right? Is it too fast? Is it too slow? Or is it right just at 3,600 RPMs? Right, the whole Goldilocks thing, right? What if the turbine's starting to overheat? Right, so I need to be able to watch over the environment and be able to interact, right, to make changes if something bad is going to happen, right? That's the whole idea of control system. Monitor what's going on and allow me to make changes. And so now we have these systems that are exposed to the internet. We don't know what they control out in the real world. We just know that they're exposed. And then we can actually look up the model for once we find more information about the asset, and here's what that PLC looks like. This is actually one that they use in the SANS training, and if you ever do any of the SANS. Now, what I really had a lot of fun with was actually looking at, they actually have a page that's essentially like running TCP connections on your local machine. So if you do netstat, and so you could see like, oh, who's connected to the machine? You could see its internal IP address. Never a good sign, right? It shows a lack of security in their program, right? We can see they're connected to, port 80, the web interface, right? You can see all of the public IP addresses out on the internet that are connected. And then you see, this is port 44818. This is Ethernet IP. So it's an OT protocol that lots of people are connecting to from over the internet. It's like, well, what are they doing, right? Well, they're trying to actually map out the controller to see what it is and then potentially have an impact to what it controls out in the real world, which honestly is not that hard to do. I actually just started releasing my OT pen testing class on YouTube, if anybody's interested. So I did create a real quick script to go through and just say, hey, pull those IP addresses and then map them out. So that way, put them on a map just so I can visualize to see like where these people are coming from. Again, it's just another one of those things like, it pops into my head. I wish, it'd be kind of fun to have something like that. And ChatGPT does it in 30 seconds or less, right? Boom. Awesome. Now, I have a ton of examples, but we're winding down. One thing to think about if you want to start playing with this, if it's something that you're not doing already, is that ChatGPT, you can try to say, hey, do these 10 things. And sometimes it can actually do all 10 things at once. Usually what happens though is it'll fail at some of them at least. So what you want to do is tell it to learn to do one thing, right? And then test it to make sure it works, right? And then add something else, test it, make sure it works. I do that iterative process. And then you'll be much more successful and you'll save yourself some time for sure. So don't try it. You can, but you're more than likely wasting your time. So just do it one thing at a time. Again, I think you'll be better off. It still doesn't take that long. So one last example before we wrap up. So I am a huge old school incident detection, incident response person. I'm a huge fan of network security monitoring. I'm a huge fan of honeypots. I am not a fan of honeypot vendors. If there are any in the room, I'm sorry. You get folks that call up and they want you to spend $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 on a honeypot. You don't need to spend that much money on a honeypot, not in IT and definitely not in OT. You can actually create 30 seconds or less, a fully functional honeypot for OT, right? So we're going to just say, hey, create a listener on TCP 502 that we're looking at, right? The port for Modbus, the most commonly used OT protocol that's out there. And in this case, I could say, hey, if this machine gets pinged, let me know. And if this thing, if I get a SYN packet and I send a SYN ACK back, but I don't get the final acknowledgement, what would that indicate is happening? Anybody? Yeah, I just got scanned. Yeah, I just got port scanned. So I got port scans, they normally don't happen in OT environments, right? So that should be something we want to be aware of. So tell me. And so this is what it looks like on the back end, right? I get pinged, 4 pings, that's from a Windows machine, right? And then it's you might have got port scans, probably with Nmap. And that's just a start, right? So then, okay, great. Let's go ahead and we have 502, so let's actually make it look like an actual PLC. And now PLCs actually store information in what they call coils and registers. So coils store zeros and ones, so binary, right? And then registers store values of 0 through 65,535. And so that's where if you have, let's say, a power plant, and just to simplify, right, I have that turbine spinning. I literally have a coil that's turned to a 1 to indicate that the turbine is on, right? It's as simple as that, believe it or not. In a lot of environments, you can connect to the machine and turn that 1 to a 0, and guess what? You actually turn it off. It is literally that easy a lot of times. So in this case, we actually then go and create this honeypot. And not only is it listening for pings and port scans, but now it allows somebody to connect to it as a real PLC, and then it's actually looking for those different commands. So here you can read it, and it sends you all those values, so you see all the zeros and ones. And then it also sends all the register values, and then it even allows you to write them. So if somebody's trying to write to your PLC, yeah, you have an attacker in the environment, right? 100% fidelity. That's why we love honeypots. No case about it. So you don't have to spend $50,000 for an ICS honeypot. You can write one with ChatGPT in 30 seconds or less. Right? So there's a lot of possibilities. And that's really why I wanted to put the presentation together and really just want to say thank you for everybody for coming. So I have a couple links at the end. You can see this is a much longer talk. We'll eventually get there. And there's the links. So thank you again. I appreciate it. I'll be around if there's any questions, and then come see us at the ICS Village. So thank you.